Oil prices saw another spike, with Brent crude surpassing $110 per barrel, following an Israeli attack on Iran's key South Pars natural gas field, and retaliation from Iran, a strike on major energy infrastructure in Qatar. U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested the idea of shifting responsibility for securing the Strait of Hormuz to countries that depend on the waterway, saying if the U.S. were to finish off what's left of Iran, it would put what he called non-responsive allies in gear. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates steady for a second straight meeting, noting uncertainty from the Middle East conflict. This comes as policymakers still expect to make one rate cut this year, as they face a difficult balancing act between renewed inflationary pressures and a weakening labor market. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. As the conflict in the Middle East continues, attacks on energy infrastructure led global oil prices to spike overnight. Experts say this may worsen if disruptions persist. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
Global oil prices surged sharply after military exchanges between Israel and Iran targeted key energy infrastructures across the Middle East. May deliver Brent crude futures, a global benchmark, jumped above $111 at 4:48 p.m. Eastern Time. With high volatility, Brent's return to the $110 range was the first time in 9 days. April delivery West Texas Intermediate futures climbed to $100 a barrel. This comes as Iranian state media reported that Israel struck gas processing infrastructure for the South Pars field, which accounts for more than 70% of Iran's natural gas production. The strike marks the first time Israel has directly targeted Iran's energy production infrastructure, having previously limited attacks to fuel storage sites. U.S. officials said Washington had been informed of the plan in advance, but was not involved in the operation. In retaliation, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps gave a list of imminent attacks on energy facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, urging evacuations. It then launched a missile strike on a major gas-producing area in Qatar, which accounts for roughly 20% of global LNG supply. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry also said that it had intercepted and destroyed 4 ballistic missiles launched toward Riyadh. Experts warned that the conflict could further disrupt global energy flows, particularly as the Strait of Hormuz faces effective closure. Roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply passes through the strait. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested that countries heavily dependent on energy shipments through the Strait of Hormuz take responsibility for securing the waterway once the current crisis is over. In a post on social media platform Truth Social, Trump questioned what would happen if the U.S. stepped back after finishing off the threat from what he calls the Iranian terror state, arguing that nations relying on the strait would be forced to act. Trump's remarks hint at increased pressure on allies who have resisted U.S. calls to deploy naval forces to protect shipping in the strait. Though the Strait of Hormuz is a critical route for global oil shipments, the United States has a relatively low dependence on Middle Eastern oil imports, whereas Asian and European economies, including South Korea and Japan, are much more reliant on oil from the region. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates unchanged for a second straight meeting, citing elevated uncertainty from the ongoing Middle East conflict. Policymakers still project one rate cut this year, despite rising oil prices and weaker job data clouding the economic outlook. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has held its benchmark interest rate steady for a second straight meeting, maintaining its projection of one rate cut this year as uncertainty grows over the economic fallout from the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. At its two-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting on Wednesday, the central bank decided to keep the federal funds rate unchanged in the 3.5 to 3.75% range.
Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy rate unchanged. We see the current stance of monetary policy as appropriate to promote progress toward our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals.
The move leaves the interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States at up to 1.25 percentage points. The decision also comes as policymakers face a difficult balancing act. Rising global oil prices are fueling concerns about renewed inflationary pressure, while a weaker U.S. labor market adds to worries about slowing growth. The latest employment report showed the economy lost 92,000 jobs last month. Despite the uncertainty, the Fed's updated median forecast still points to the federal funds rate being lowered to around 3.4% by the end of the year, signaling the possibility of a single quarter percentage point cut in 2026, unchanged from its December outlook. In its statement, the central bank warned that uncertainty about the economic outlook remains elevated, particularly due to developments in the Middle East. Officials said the implications of the conflict for the U.S. economy are unclear, but stressed they are closely monitoring risks to both sides of the Fed's dual mandate of achieving maximum employment and stable inflation at around 2%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell also stressed that higher energy prices are likely to push overall inflation higher in the near term. However, he cautioned that it is still too early to determine how lasting or severe the impact will be. When asked whether the Fed expects the current oil shock to be temporary, Powell said no one can be certain. He noted the economic effects could turn out to be much smaller or significantly larger than anticipated, underscoring the high level of uncertainty facing policymakers. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A new U.S. intelligence assessment says North Korea has strengthened its military capabilities through support provided to Russia in the war against Ukraine. The findings come from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Annual Threat Assessment of the U.S. Intelligence Community released on Wednesday. The report says North Korean forces have gained valuable modern combat experience and equipment, though the long-term impact will depend on how effectively Pyongyang institutionalizes those lessons. Despite the gains, the assessment notes the North is still likely to remain deterred by the United States and its allies. It also warns that Pyongyang continues to expand its strategic weapons programs, including missiles and nuclear warheads, and highlights its increasingly sophisticated cyber operations as a growing security threat. Meanwhile, North Korea and China are ramping up economic cooperation, with bilateral trade in the first 2 months of this year reaching its highest level in 9 years. According to customs data from China, trade between the two sides in January and February rose nearly 20% on year to about 2.9 billion yuan, or roughly $421 million US. China's exports to North Korea climbed more than 16%, while imports from the north jumped over 34%. The increase comes as the two sides resume cross-border transport links, including an international passenger train service between Pyongyang and Beijing for the first time in 6 years. Air China is also set to restart its Pyongyang-Beijing route later this month. President Lee Jae-myung has called for the need to speed up reforming the nation's capital market amid the crisis in the Middle East, vowing to overcome the so-called Korea discount. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
On the fluctuating local stock markets due to the war in the Middle East, the president said this.
작년에 2,500~600선에서 정말 쉬지 않고 조정도 조정 없이 6,000 중반대까지 올라갔는데 사실 매우 불안한 느낌을 가지고 있었지만 어쩌면 하나의 계기로 좀 이렇게 다지는 그런 과정을 겪고 있는 것 같기도 합니다.
He was speaking at a dialogue session with investors, firms, and financial authorities on Wednesday, saying that beyond overcoming the external challenge, the country should take the lead in carrying out reforms. Noting the so-called Korea discount, President Lee Jae-myung once again promised to close the valuation gap between local equities and global peers by addressing corporate governance issues.
저는 우리가 하기에 따라서 이 코리아 디스카운트가 아니고 얼마든지 정상평가를 넘어서서 코리아 프리미엄도 가능하다.
President Lee focused not only on cracking down on stock manipulation and enhancing the predictability of economic policies, but also on geopolitical risks.
한반도의 분단 상황 때문에 생겨나는 그리고 그게 정치적으로 악용되면서 지정학적 리스크가 또 문제였죠. 좀 잘 될라 그러면 뭐 휴전선에서 말폭탄이 오가다가 심지어 총격이 발생해서 저 나라 또 전쟁 나는 거 아닐까?
The financial authorities plan to introduce the naming and shaming of undervalued stocks and reorganize the Kosdaq market by separating more mature firms from less mature ones. Curbing double listings was also a focal point.
For a sustainable Korea premium, governance issues should be resolved, such as improving shareholder return and a ban on double listings.
President Lee noted that normalizing the capital market is crucial for the nation's economy and development, hoping that it could also help alleviate real estate speculation. South Korea has made a series of revisions to the Commercial Act, including an amendment mandating companies to cancel treasury stock to improve shareholder value. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The wait is over for BTS fans worldwide. As the global pop icons gear up for a historic free comeback concert in Seoul this weekend, experts forecast a massive economic ripple effect, the BTS-Nomics rivaling the financial impact of Taylor Swift's recent world tour. Our Chung Hye-rim explains more.
This Saturday, March 21st, Seoul's historic Gwanghwamun Square will turn into a sea of purple as BTS holds a massive free concert celebrating their fifth album, Arirang, drawing hundreds of thousands of fans. The economic anticipation is just as staggering as the expected crowd size. According to a report by IBK Investment and Securities, direct revenue from this comeback alone is projected to reach 2.9 trillion Korean won, or almost $2 billion US dollars. This conservative estimate factors in 6 million album sales, 6 million tour attendees, and massive merchandise revenue. The local tourism and retail sectors are already feeling this BTS effect. According to the travel platform 여기어때, hotel bookings in the downtown Jongno-gu and Jung-gu districts for this weekend have skyrocketed by 450% compared to the same period last year. Hotels in the downtown area are nearly fully booked, and international fans are expected to spend immensely during their stay before and after the concert.
If we estimate that about 100,000 of the 200,000 expected attendees are foreign tourists, and the average foreign tourist spends about 2.5 million won, this single event alone could generate a direct economic impact of 250 billion won.
For many fans, the trip goes beyond the concert itself. From K-pop merchandise stores in Myeongdong to local restaurants and cultural hotspots, visitors are actively seeking experiences tied to Korean culture.
Visitors don't just stay around Gwanghwamun. Foreign tourists are increasingly seeking out trendy alleys like Seong-sudong. We expect this massive influx to revitalize smaller, local commercial districts across the entire city of Seoul.
The economic impact may extend well beyond a single event, fueling activity across the city's broader tourism ecosystem. Some analysts are already comparing the phenomenon to Swift-Nomics, driven by Taylor Swift, but say BTS could generate an even wider global footprint. This world tour could reach a staggering 40 trillion won, or 269 million US dollars in revenue. Industry insiders also say that a performance in this symbolic space could transform the area into a long-term destination for K-pop fans, similar to the Beatles' Abbey Road in London. As the capital prepares for the historic kickoff, all eyes are locked on Gwanghwamun. Chung Hye-rim, Arirang News.
So with more than 200,000 people expected to gather at Gwanghwamun Square for a BTS comeback concert this Saturday, preparations are in full swing. Telecom companies in particular are working to ensure seamless connectivity for the massive crowd. Our Park Jun-an has more.
Cell site technicians are deploying a temporary mobile cell site. The vehicle, designed to enhance internet connectivity and support spikes in network traffic, is being set up in preparation for BTS' comeback concert on Saturday. Unlike other large gatherings with relatively low or non-essential internet use, this concert is expected to generate exceptionally high data use in a concentrated area. In particular, data traffic is likely to surge in and around the stage due to a spike in photo and video uploads, while data use may also rise outside as people watch live streams.
We saw reports that many foreign tourists would be attending, so we also analyzed roaming usage rates. We've modeled scenarios for up to 260,000 visitors and then designed a network accordingly, so we're confident people will be able to use telecom services without disruption.
On top of that, the three major mobile carriers said they will actively implement AI systems when providing network services to better distribute traffic. An expert said Korea's telecommunications service is already world-class, capable of handling concentrated traffic.
I think Korea's telecommunications technology, especially on the operational side, is among the best in the world. So the amount of bandwidth available per person is already quite high. And in terms of handling dense traffic, I believe we are far more capable than many other countries.
While BTS takes the spotlight, these unsung heroes keep the connection seamless so fans can fully enjoy the moment. The concert at Gwanghwamun Square is also a real-world testbed for Korea's telecom capabilities. Don't worry, BTS fans. Whether you're among the 22,000 concert goers or watching from outside the venue, telecom companies have your fast on-site internet connection covered. 박준환, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. The top U.S. intelligence official says that Iran's government remains intact but significantly weakened. During a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing in Washington on Wednesday, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard stated that U.S. strikes last year obliterated Iran's nuclear program with no signs of reconstruction. However, Gabbard repeatedly declined to disclose whether the intelligence community warned President Trump about the possible fallout of the current war, including the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The testimony follows the resignation of counterterrorism chief Joe Kent, who argued that Iran posed no imminent threat. Gabbard said that defining an imminent threat remains the president's sole responsibility. U.S. civil rights activist Dolores Huerta on Wednesday accused her United Farm Workers of America co-founder Cesar Chavez of sexually abusing her and others decades ago. The 95-year-old activist said in a formal statement that she had remained silent for 60 years to protect the farm worker movement, but could no longer hide the truth. The allegations, which include claims of forced encounters and secret pregnancies, coincided with the New York Times investigation into Chavez's treatment of young women. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has moved to abolish the state's Cesar Chavez Day holiday, while Arizona and New Mexico leaders called for the removal of his name from public landmarks. Chavez died in 1993. The Senegalese government is calling for an independent international investigation into suspected corruption within African football's governing body. The demand follows a ruling by the Confederation of African Football, or CAF, on Tuesday, which stripped Senegal of its 2025 Africa Cup of Nations title and awarded it to Morocco. Although Senegal won the January final 1-0 on the pitch, CAF overturned the result, ruling it a forfeiture because Senegalese players staged a 17-minute walk-off to protest a stoppage time penalty. The Senegalese Football Federation on Wednesday filed an appeal with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, labeling the decision a, quote, grossly illegal breach of trust. U.S. President Donald Trump has sparked international debate after suggesting statehood for Venezuela following their World Baseball Classic semifinal victory. After Venezuela defeated Italy 4-2 in Miami on Monday to advance to the final against Team USA, Trump posted on Truth Social questioning if, quote, statehood number 51 was the, quote, magic behind the country's recent changes. The comment follows dramatic shifts in U.S. relations with Venezuela, which included a military operation that captured Nicolas Maduro and the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
We are in for another day of big temperature swings, especially across inland areas. It was a colder start compared to yesterday, but temperatures will climb quickly this afternoon, rising by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in many places. And it gets even milder from here. It's going to be slightly breezier than normal today, but starting tomorrow, highs will be running above seasonal averages. And this afternoon, daily highs will be 1 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than yesterday. So we're getting up to 11 degrees. Daegu will be much warmer at 16 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Also good news on the air quality front. Air quality has returned to normal. Then we are expecting mostly clear skies to stick around for the time being, and we should notice morning temperatures gradually rising as well. Just keep in mind those big day to night temperature gaps will stick around, so it's worth dressing in layers.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.